The galaxy did not notice the moment it sealed its own ignorance. We believed we understood danger. We had cataloged it, measured it, conquered it. Entire species reduced to footnotes in military archives. Entire worlds silenced under the weight of superior fleets. We knew what power looked like. Towering exoskeletons, plasma-laced claws, war forms bred for annihilation. Humans were not on that list. From the observation deck of the High Assembly flagship, I watched them enter our history as an afterthought. The chamber below was a monument to dominance, vaulted ceilings of alloyed starlight, gravity calibrated for the comfort of giants, banners of conquered systems suspended like trophies. War commanders from 100 species stood in a slow orbit around the central dais, each one a living weapon, each one a testament to survival through supremacy. And among them stood the human, small, fragile, unremarkable, encased not in armor, but in fabric. No visible weapons, no natural defenses, no biological augmentations that our scanners could detect. If anything, they seemed incomplete, as though evolution had abandoned them halfway through design. We had invited them out of courtesy. No, less than that. We had invited them to remind them of their place. I remember leaning closer to the viewing interface, enhancing the resolution, searching for something, anything that justified their presence. My kind prides itself on perception. We do not overlook threats. And yet, I saw nothing. The human stood still at the center of the chamber, surrounded by predators who could extinguish him in less than a heartbeat. His posture was neutral, his breathing steady, his gaze lowered. Submission, I assumed. It was the only logical explanation. Then Commander Virek moved. Even among warlords, Virek was exceptional. His species had evolved in constant atmospheric combustion. His very skin shimmered with contained thermal energy. He had ended 3 planetary rebellions personally. Entire populations had surrendered at the mere mention of his approach. He did not speak as he approached the human. He did not need to. His presence was language enough. The chamber shifted subtly as he stepped forward. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the most arrogant commanders angled their bodies away, granting him an unspoken corridor of dominance. I remember noting the human's reaction. There was none. No flinch, no retreat, no elevation in heart rate. Our sensors confirmed it. If he felt fear, it did not manifest in any measurable way. Curious. Virek stopped a single step away from him. The size difference was almost absurd. The commander loomed like a siege engine. The human barely reached the midpoint of his armored torso. For a moment, they simply stood there, predator and what we assumed was prey. Then Virek raised his hand, slowly, deliberately. The motion itself carried intent, not an attack, not a killing strike, something worse, an insult. I felt a ripple of anticipation across the chamber. Among warrior species, humiliation is often more devastating than death. To be struck publicly, reduced in status before witnesses, was a declaration of absolute inferiority. Still, I expected the human to react, to step back, to plead, to do anything that aligned with survival instinct. He did not move. The strike landed with a sharp, echoing crack that reverberated through the chamber's vast architecture. The human's head snapped to the side. The sound lingered. Then, silence. Complete, absolute, suffocating silence. Even the ambient system seemed to dim, as though the ship itself was holding its breath. I leaned forward, my perception narrowing, focusing entirely on the figure below. The human did not fall. He did not speak. For a fraction of a moment, he remained exactly as he had been, head turned, body still, the imprint of Virek's hand visible across his face. And then, something changed. It was not dramatic, not obvious,
no surge of energy, no sudden movement. But I felt it. A shift. Ancient. Subtle. Wrong. The kind of shift one only senses on the edge of extinction. 5 seconds. That is how long it lasted. 5 seconds in which the galaxy, for the first time in recorded history, did not know what would happen next. The first second passed with confusion, the second with expectation. By the third, discomfort began to spread. I observed commanders, beings who had slaughtered entire species, adjust their stances, their instincts whispering warnings their logic could not explain. The fourth second stretched. Something in the air tightened, like a structure under unseen stress. And then, the fifth. The human moved. No, he did not move. He finished becoming something else. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his head. I magnified the image without conscious thought, my focus locking onto his face, onto his eyes. And in that instant, I understood our mistake. There was no fear there, no submission, no weakness. What I saw instead was something I had no classification for, something no archive had prepared me to recognize. Control. Not the absence of violence, but its containment. It was as if I were staring into a star held together by will alone, its destruction postponed, not prevented. Around him, the chamber remained frozen. Weapons were not drawn, commands were not issued, because no one understood what they were seeing. No one, perhaps, except their instincts. The human's gaze rose to meet Virex, not in defiance, not in rage, but in decision. And in that moment, as an observer who had witnessed the fall of civilizations, I felt something I had not experienced in cycles beyond counting. Uncertainty. Because the galaxy had just committed an error it could not undo. And somewhere deep within my cognition, a realization began to take form. We had not invited a weak species into our halls. We had invited something far worse. We had invited restraint. And I began to wonder, what would happen if it ended?
There are moments in history that refuse to move at the speed of time. They stretch, distort, fracture into pieces the mind cannot assemble correctly. I have replayed those 5 seconds more times than I can quantify, slowed them, dissected them, stripped them down to individual muscle fibers and neural impulses. And still, I do not fully understand what I witnessed, but I will tell you what I saw. The first second began the moment the human's head remained turned from the impact. Our sensors flooded me with data, biometrics, thermal readings, neurological patterns. Everything appeared normal. Elevated stress, yes, minor tissue damage, a spike in adrenaline. Nothing that justified the shift I felt, nothing that explained the silence. The chamber should have reacted. Protocol dictated escalation, guards stepping forward, mediators intervening, voices rising. None of that happened, because something deeper than protocol had taken hold. Instinct. The second passed as the human's body remained still, yet no longer passive. I adjusted the magnification again, isolating micro-movements, the tightening of muscle fibers along his neck, the subtle repositioning of his feet against the polished floor. Balance correction, not recovery, preparation. A realization began forming, faint and unwelcome. This was not the aftermath of an attack. This was the beginning of one. Across the chamber, I observed the others. The predators noticed first, a Threxian warlord whose species hunted in vacuum and consumed radiation storms, shifted his stance backward by half a step, a movement so small it would have gone unnoticed by most. But I saw it, because it mirrored my own reaction. The prey species did not analyze, they froze.
Entire clusters of diplomats and observers went motionless, their autonomic systems overriding conscious thought. Their kind had survived for millennia by recognizing death before it arrived, and they were recognizing something now, something we had failed to categorize. The third second began when the human straightened. It was a simple motion, controlled, smooth, economical, but it carried weight, like a mechanism locking into place. His head returned to center alignment, vertebrae adjusting with precise, almost mechanical intent. His shoulders rolled back slightly, posture shifting from neutral to aligned, optimized. I searched for tremors, for hesitation, for any indication of emotional instability. There was none. No rage spike, no erratic neurofiring, only focus, pure, unbroken focus. Commander Virek noticed it too, I could tell. Though he stood unmoving, his thermal output increased by a measurable margin, a subconscious reaction, his species equivalent of unease. His claws flexed once, briefly, as though recalibrating grip strength. Yet he did not step back. Pride is a powerful inhibitor of survival. The fourth second arrived with a sound so small it should have been irrelevant. The human exhaled. Not sharply, not shakily, slowly, deliberately. I isolated the audio feed, enhancing it beyond standard thresholds. The breath carried no tremor, no irregularity. It was not the breath of fear. It was the breath of conclusion, a decision made. I did not yet understand what that meant, but every instinct I possessed, every evolutionary advantage my species had refined over eons, began issuing the same directive. This is wrong. The chamber tightened around that moment. Even the air circulation system seemed to hesitate, as though unwilling to disturb whatever invisible threshold had been crossed. And then, the fifth second. This is where my memory fails me, or perhaps protects me, because what occurred cannot be reconstructed as a continuous event. Only fragments remain. A shift in light. No, not light. Motion disrupting light. A distortion across my visual feed, too fast for the system to compensate. I attempted to slow the recording further, breaking it into subframes. It did not help. The human disappeared. Not literally, but functionally. One frame, he stands before Virek. The next, he is somewhere else, closer, inside the commander's reach. No, inside his defense perimeter. There is a sound. I replayed it thousands of times. At first, I believed it to be metal fatigue, the stress fracture of Virek's armor under sudden force. But that is not accurate. It is wetter than that, sharper, a tearing noise layered with compression, like structure and flesh failing simultaneously. Then, impact, but not where it should have been. Virek's body does not recoil as expected. There is no visible strike, no extended limb, no weapon discharge. And yet, something separates. The next frame resolves, and the universe corrects itself. Commander Virek is no longer whole. His body remains standing for a fraction of a moment, impossibly upright, as though unaware of its own condition. Then it collapses, slowly, heavily. The head is already falling, detached, severed with such precision and such force that even his reinforced exoskeletal plating has been compromised. Layers designed to withstand plasma bombardment have been breached as though they were ceremonial coverings. The head strikes the polished floor, once, twice, and rolls. I track its movement automatically, my systems unable to disengage. It comes to rest at the edge of the central dais, facing upward, eyes still open, expression unchanged, frozen in the last moment before comprehension. Silence follows. Not the silence from before. This is different. This is absence, the absence of certainty. Then the chamber erupts. Weapons rise in unison, energy rifles, kinetic launchers, bio-integrated weaponry primed and aimed at a single point. The human. Alarms begin to trigger, overlapping in chaotic patterns. Security protocols cascade through the system. Emergency response units flood the outer corridors. And at the center of it all, he stands, exactly where he should not be, exactly where no being should have been able to move. His posture is neutral once more, breathing steady, no visible exertion, no weapon in hand, no indication that he has just performed an act that defies every model of combat we possess. There is no blood on him. That detail I remember clearly. There should have been. By all physical laws, by all biological expectations, there should have been evidence, residue, transfer, something to confirm the violence that had just occurred. There was none. Only the result remained. Around him, the guards hesitate, weapons locked, targeting systems engaged, and yet no one fires. I search for the reason. Command delay? Confusion? System lag? No, it is none of those. It is the same thing that held the chamber in silence before. Instinct. The understanding, unspoken, unprocessed, that whatever just happened cannot be countered conventionally. The human finally moves again. Not to attack, not to flee. He simply adjusts his stance slightly, turning his head as though observing the reactions around him. Calm, measured, unconcerned, as if the elimination of one of the galaxy's most feared commanders was insufficient to disturb him. And in that moment, something inside me fractures. Not fear, not yet, something more fundamental. Certainty. Because everything we believed about this species, every classification, every risk assessment, every dismissal, is wrong. Not slightly, not partially, completely. We did not underestimate humans. We failed to understand them at all. And as I watched that lone figure stand amidst the aftermath of impossible violence, surrounded by weapons that no one dared to fire, a single realization took hold. Cold, absolute, irreversible. The danger was never their strength. It was the fact that they had been choosing not to use it. And now, something had changed.
Chaos should have followed. By every established model of interspecies conflict, the chamber should have dissolved into immediate violence. Retaliation protocols should have triggered without hesitation. The death of a high-ranking commander, especially one like Virek, was an act of war. And yet, war did not begin. It hovered, uncertain, waiting. Weapons remain trained on the human, their targeting matrices converging from every angle. Dozens of firing solutions calculated, hundreds of trajectories mapped, enough force assembled in that single chamber to erase a city from orbit. Still, no one fired. I searched for the reason. At first, I believed it to be shock, a temporary paralysis caused by the impossibility of what we had witnessed, but as the seconds stretched, that explanation failed. Shock fades. This did not. This deepened. And as I observed the hesitation spreading through warriors who had never known restraint, an answer began to surface from a place I had long neglected. Our archives. Specifically, Earth. Classified Deathworld Level 12. A designation we rarely revisited because it was inconvenient, because it contradicted our assumptions. I accessed the records in real time, pulling data streams directly into my perception field as the human stood below, unmoving, unchallenged. Gravity, 1.3 standard. Atmosphere, volatile oxygen density. Surface conditions, extreme variability, freezing wastelands, burning deserts, crushing oceans. Native fauna, aggressively competitive, biologically weaponized through natural selection. Environmental hazards, constant. It was a world that did not permit weakness. And yet, our conclusion had been simple.
Anything that evolved there must be fragile. The logic had seemed sound at the time. High-risk environments produce survivors, yes, but survivors often lack the capacity for expansion. They endure, they do not dominate. We were wrong. I began scanning deeper. Medical reports, combat logs, survival records, fragments of human history we had dismissed as statistical anomalies. A human continuing to function after sustaining structural damage that would incapacitate most species. Another adapting to hostile atmospheric conditions within minutes. Entire groups persisting through prolonged deprivation, nutritional, environmental, psychological, without collapse. At first glance, each instance seemed improbable. Together, they formed a pattern. Not of endurance, but of expectation. This was normal for them. This was baseline. Below me, the human shifted his weight slightly. A small motion, but it caused an immediate reaction. Not from the prey species, from the predators. A Cthari enforcer, whose kind hunted apex leviathans in subspace currents, took a step back. Not consciously, not deliberately, instinctively. And in that moment, the realization crystallized. Predators recognize apex predators. It is not a learned behavior. It is not a strategic calculation. It is encoded, deep within the oldest layers of cognition. A silent agreement written into evolution itself. There is always something higher. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, that something was standing in the center of our chamber. Unarmed, unarmored, unafraid. I returned to the data. Human physiology was not extraordinary in isolation. Their muscle density, bone structure, neural pathways all fell within acceptable ranges when compared to other species. Nothing about their bodies explained what I had seen, which left only one variable: their minds. Psychological analysis had always been inconclusive. Humans displayed contradictory behaviors, cooperation and aggression, empathy and brutality, logic and impulse. We had labeled them inconsistent, unstable. But now I saw the truth. They were not inconsistent, they were adaptive. Pain tolerance elevated beyond predictive models. Emotional suppression, selective, controlled, deployable. Aggression, not constant, but strategic. They did not exist in a permanent state of violence. They chose it. And that choice made all the difference. Because a being that is always violent can be predicted, contained, outmaneuvered. But a being that is capable of violence and chooses restraint, that being is unknowable. Below, the tension reached a threshold. Command signals began to ripple through the chamber. I intercepted fragments, orders being issued, countermanded, reissued with altered parameters. No consensus, no unity. Fear does that. It fractures authority. Finally, one of the senior diplomats stepped forward. Elder Tavares, an entity whose influence spanned multiple systems, whose voice had ended conflicts without a single shot fired. If anyone could restore order, it would be him. He raised a limb, signaling restraint. "Stand down," he commanded, his voice amplified across the chamber. "All units, hold position." The weapons did not lower, but they did not fire. That was the best he could achieve. Tavares turned towards the human, his posture carefully neutral. "You will explain your actions," he said. A demand, but softened, measured. For the first time, I heard uncertainty in his tone. And then, the human spoke. The chamber did not amplify his voice. It did not need to. Every being present heard him, clearly, perfectly. I was struck. The words were simple, unadorned, but there was something beneath them, something that carried weight far beyond their meaning. No anger, no hostility, only fact. Tavares hesitated. "That does not justify." "It does," the human replied. "Not louder, not sharper, just final." The interruption alone sent a ripple through the chamber. Interrupting a figure like Tavares was not merely disrespect, it was unthinkable. And yet, no one moved to punish him, because something in his tone made it clear. He was not arguing, he was stating a boundary. I focused entirely on his voice, analyzing every nuance. No elevated stress markers, no emotional volatility, only control. Absolute, unyielding control. "You invited us here. We accepted in good faith." A pause, measured, deliberate. "We will not be treated as lesser." The words settled over the chamber like gravitational force. Heavy, unavoidable. And then the most terrifying part. No one challenged them. Not because they agreed, but because at some fundamental level they understood. This was not a threat. It was not a declaration of war. It was a line, clear, defined, immutable. Cross it, and the consequences would not be negotiable. Around the chamber, I watched as the shift completed. It was subtle. No grand gestures, no formal declarations, but it was there. Weapons lowered, not fully, but enough. Postures changed, angles softened, distance increased. The galaxy was recalibrating itself in real time, not through conflict, through realization. Humans were not weak, they were not fragile, they were not to be dismissed. They were restrained. And as I observed that single individual stand at the center of a chamber filled with beings who could end worlds, I understood the true implication of that word. Restraint is not the absence of power, it is the containment of it. And containment can fail. The human turned slightly, his gaze passing over the assembled forces, not challengingly, not submissively, but with quiet awareness, as if measuring, as if deciding. And for the first time since the incident began, a question formed in my mind that I could not suppress. Not what are humans, but how long have they been holding back?
There is a silence that follows violence, and then there is the silence that prevents it. I had witnessed both across centuries of observation, worlds that fell screaming into extinction, fleets that burned in synchronized fury. Conflict, in all its forms, was predictable. It followed patterns. It obeyed escalation curves. This was something else. The chamber had become a battlefield without movement. Weapons remained raised, their targeting systems fixed with unwavering precision on the human's position. Energy signatures hummed at the edge of discharge. Trigger thresholds hovered within fractional margins of activation. And yet, no one fired. Not a single shot. I expanded my perception outward, scanning the room not as individuals, but as a collective system. What I found unsettled me more than the violence that had preceded it. Synchronization. Not of action, but of restraint. This was not hesitation born from confusion. This was hesitation born from agreement. An unspoken consensus spreading through dozens of species, each with their own doctrines, their own instincts, their own thresholds for violence, all arriving at the same conclusion: do not escalate. And beneath that conclusion, something deeper: you may not survive if you do. This was not fear of destruction.
Destruction was understood, quantifiable, survivable in some form. This was fear of consequence, unknown consequence, unmeasured response, the kind that does not stop once it begins. At the center of it all, the human moved. The reaction was immediate, every weapon adjusted by a fraction, every targeting system recalibrated, dozens of combat algorithms prepared to execute simultaneously. But the human did not advance. He stepped back. One step, measured, controlled. And in that single motion, he did something no show of force could have achieved. He introduced doubt. I felt it ripple outward, disrupting the fragile equilibrium that had formed. Because the movement made no sense. A being capable of eliminating Commander Virek in less than a perceptible instant was retreating? No, not retreating. Repositioning. The distinction mattered. I ran predictive models feeding in the new variable. None of them aligned. Because every known species operated under a fundamental principle: demonstrate dominance when advantage is secured, exploit weakness, press the attack, end the conflict before it can evolve. The human did none of these things. Instead, he reduced the immediate threat, not by weakening himself, but by choosing not to act. And that was far more destabilizing, because it meant his previous action had not been instinctive, not reactive. It had been calculated, a response selected from a range of options, which implied something far more dangerous. He had chosen the minimum necessary force. The chamber struggled to process that, because if that was the minimum, what did the maximum look like? Stand down. The command cut through the tension, amplified, urgent, edged with strain. Elder Tavares again. But this time, the authority in his voice was thinner, less absolute. He stepped forward, placing himself between the human and the assembled forces, a symbolic gesture, one meant to reassert control. It did not have the intended effect. Lower your weapons, he continued, sweeping his gaze across the chamber. This situation is under... He stopped, not because he chose to, because the human was looking at him. No movement, no threat, just attention. And it was enough. I magnified the interaction, isolating Tavares's physiological responses. His neural activity spiked. Microtremors along his limbs betrayed a loss of internal stability. He was experiencing something rare for his kind: uncertainty under observation. You will comply, Tavares said, more quietly now, directing the statement at the human. You are outnumbered, you are contained. Further resistance will... The human did not respond. He did not interrupt. He did not acknowledge the statement in any overt way. He simply watched. And the silence that followed was devastating. Because authority requires recognition. Without it, it is nothing more than sound. I observed the moment Tavares realized this. It was subtle. A fractional delay before his next breath. A hesitation before his next word. A flicker of something behind his eyes. Not fear. Something worse. Irrelevance. For the first time in his long existence, his position did not define the outcome. Power had shifted. Not officially, not structurally, but undeniably. It no longer resided in titles, ranks, or fleets. It resided in capability. And capability in that moment belonged to the human. Beyond the chamber, the galaxy had begun to react. I extended my awareness through external channels, tapping into the vast network of quantum communications that bound our civilizations together. The data flow was staggering. emergency transmissions, fleet mobilization orders, strategic recalculations occurring in real time across multiple star systems. Entire armadas were shifting positions, aligning towards the assembly's location. Not to attack, not yet. To prepare. To be ready for whatever came next, because no one knew what that would be. Information spread faster than light itself. Fragmented recordings, partial sensor logs, distorted visual feeds capturing the impossible moment of Virek's death. Worlds paused, governments halted. Entire species diverted their attention to a single point in space, to a single chamber, to a single human. Back inside, nothing had changed, and everything had. The human stood as he had before, calm, composed, unthreatened. But now, the stillness carried meaning. It was no longer neutrality. It was patience. A different kind of power, the kind that does not need to assert itself, because it knows it already exists. Around him, the assembled forces maintained their positions, caught in a state of suspended decision. Every possible future branched from this moment. War, retreat, negotiation, annihilation. All of them balanced on a single variable, what the human chose to do next. And that was the most destabilizing factor of all, because control had shifted completely. Not to a council, not to a fleet, not to a species, to an individual. I returned my focus fully to him, analyzing every detail, every micro-expression, every breath, searching for intent, for indication, for anything that would allow prediction. I found nothing. Only stillness, only control, only that same impossible containment of something far greater than what had already been revealed. And as I observed him, this singular representative of a species we had dismissed, I felt a question form that I could not suppress, not born of curiosity, but of survival. If this is one human, then what, in all the known universe, would an army of them look like?
Understanding did not arrive all at once. It never does. It seeps in, through fractures and certainty, through data once ignored, through patterns that only reveal themselves when it is already too late to remain ignorant. As the chamber held its breath around a single unmoving human, I turned inward, toward the archives we had neglected, the fragments of truth we had dismissed as statistical noise. And what I found was not a species. It was a doctrine, not written, not declared, but lived. Humanity did not fight the way the galaxy fought. They did not rely solely on superior weaponry, though they possessed it. They did not depend entirely on biological advantage, though they refined it. They did something far more dangerous. They adapted. I began pulling historical records, conflicts buried beneath layers of irrelevance, engagements where humans had faced opponents with overwhelming technological superiority, species with stronger bodies, faster reaction times, greater numbers. By every measurable metric, humans should have lost. And yet, they did not. They studied. That was the first constant. Before every escalation, before every decisive moment, there was observation, data gathering, behavioral analysis. They learned their enemies, not just their capabilities, their patterns, their assumptions, their limits. And then they broke them. One record detailed a prolonged conflict on a fractured colony world. Human forces outnumbered 3-1, outgunned, outmatched. They did not engage directly.
They altered the environment, redirected weather systems, destabilized terrain, turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. Another account described a boarding action against a vessel considered impenetrable. Human units did not breach through force. They infiltrated, disabled life support in isolated sections, manipulated internal pressure gradients, forced their enemies into predictable corridors, then eliminated them, efficiently, decisively. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conflict. This was not war as we understood it. This was problem-solving, violence applied with purpose, controlled, measured, optimized. Below me, the human shifted again, and this time, the chamber broke. Not entirely, but enough. A command signal, fragmented, panicked, reached a cluster of elite guards positioned along the eastern perimeter. I traced its origin, but found no unified authority behind it. It did not matter. Fear had reached a threshold, and fear, when it cannot retreat, attacks. They moved as one. 6 units, genetically enhanced, cybernetically augmented, armed with close-range suppression weaponry designed to neutralize high-threat targets in confined environments. Their coordination was flawless. Attack vectors calculated, angles synchronized, timing executed within microsecond precision. By all known standards, this was overwhelming force. The human did not move. Not until the last possible moment. And then, everything happened at once. I slowed the feed again, isolating each movement, each fraction of action. The first guard reached striking distance. The human stepped into the attack. Not away, into. A minimal shift, barely perceptible, redirected the incoming force. The guard's momentum, once an advantage, became a vulnerability. A precise impact followed, not powerful, but exact, applied at a structural weak point. The guard collapsed instantly. Not dead, disabled. Before the body hit the ground, the human was already moving. Second target, a weapon discharge, close range, unavoidable. Except it was avoided. Not through speed alone, but anticipation. The human had already begun to move before the trigger was pulled. He had read it, predicted it. His body rotated just enough to allow the energy blast to pass within negligible proximity, dissipating harmlessly behind him. His response was immediate, controlled, a strike delivered not to destroy, but to incapacitate. Third, fourth, each engagement followed the same pattern. No wasted effort, no excess motion. Every action flowed into the next with seamless continuity, as though the human was not reacting to the battle, but executing a sequence already decided. It was not chaos, it was not instinct, it was design. By the time the final guard reached him, the outcome was already determined. The guard hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, long enough to realize this was not a fight. And that hesitation was fatal. The human closed the distance. One movement, one precise application of force. The guard fell. Silence returned. Faster this time. He stood alone again, surrounded not by enemies, but by understanding. I reviewed the engagement in its entirety, every movement, every decision. There was no randomness, no improvisation in the way we understood it, only adaptation in real time, variables assessed and resolved before they could fully manifest. This was the doctrine, not strength, not speed, not technology, but the ability to become exactly what the situation required, to shift between states, calm and violent, passive and aggressive, observer and executioner, without delay, without conflict. That is what made them unpredictable. And unpredictability is the end of strategy. Around the chamber, I watched as the shift completed. Weapons lowered, not out of surrender, out of comprehension. The guards who remained did not advance. The commanders did not issue further orders, because now they understood what I had begun to see. War with such a species would not be survived, not because they seek to destroy, but because if forced to fight, they would not stop until there is nothing left to oppose them. And the most unsettling truth of all was that this precise, measured, restrained display might still be only a fraction of what they are truly capable of.
History does not announce itself. It does not arrive with certainty or consensus or even understanding. It simply happens. And only afterward do we realize that everything has changed. The chamber remained intact. That, more than anything, defined the moment. No further strikes, no retaliatory bombardment, no cascade of violence spiraling into the kind of war the galaxy had perfected over millennia. Instead, stillness. A fragile, deliberate stillness held together not by power, but by restraint. I expanded my awareness beyond the chamber once more into the vast lattice of interstellar communication that bound civilizations together. What I found was unprecedented. Alignment. Not uniform, but converging. Across distant systems, governing bodies were already recalculating. Strategic doctrines rewritten in real time. Threat assessments revised not upward in scale, but in category. Humanity was no longer being measured against existing threats. They had become a new classification entirely. Priority channels flooded with urgent directives. Do not provoke. Reevaluate engagement protocols. Initiate diplomatic recalibration. These were not the commands of fear alone. They were the language of survival. Entire fleets, once mobilizing for potential conflict, slowed their advance, not retreating, but repositioning into observation patterns rather than attack formations. The galaxy was not preparing for war. It was preparing to avoid one. And at the center of it all, still stood the human, unharmed, unchallenged, unmoved. I returned my full focus to the chamber, watching as the final remnants of resistance dissolved into something quieter, something more complex. Understanding. Not acceptance, not agreement, but recognition of reality. Elder Tavares moved again, though more carefully this time. His posture had changed, no longer projecting dominance, but balance, measured neutrality. He approached the human slowly, each step deliberate, each movement stripped of the assumptions that had governed his authority only moments before. "You have made your position clear," he said. The phrasing mattered. Not "you are in violation," not "you will be detained," but acknowledgement. The human regarded him briefly. No reply, no need, because the statement itself was enough. Tavares inclined his head, barely but unmistakably, a gesture no one in that chamber had ever seen him give, not to an equal, not even to a superior, and certainly not to a species we had once dismissed. But the hierarchy that defined those distinctions no longer applied. "Further discussion will proceed," Tavares continued, "under revised terms." There it was, the shift made manifest, not through declaration, but through language. Revised terms, not dictated, not enforced, agreed upon. Around them, the chamber subtly reorganized itself. Commanders adjusted their positions, not encircling the human, but creating space. Distances increased, lines of sight cleared. Not containment, accommodation. The difference was everything. I analyzed the transformation as it unfolded, noting each micro-adjustment, each recalibration of posture and presence. This was not submission, it was adaptation.
the same principle that defined humanity, now spreading through the galaxy in response to it. A species had revealed its nature, and the rest of us were being forced to evolve. Time resumed its normal flow, not in reality, but in perception. The suspended moment ended, and with it the illusion that control had ever belonged to anyone but the one who held it without needing to assert it. The human finally moved. Not abruptly, not unpredictably. He turned, away from the center of the chamber, away from the fallen, away from the weapons that once threatened him, and began to walk. The path before him cleared instantly. No command issued, no signal transmitted, and yet every being present understood the necessity. They stepped aside. Predators, warlords, commanders who had never yielded ground in their existence. They moved, because something deeper than pride had taken precedence: survival. I tracked his movement as he crossed the chamber, each step steady, unhurried. No guards approached him, no restraints were deployed, because none were required. Not because he could not be contained, but because attempting to do so would have consequences no one was willing to test. At the far end of the chamber, the entry corridor opened. Security forces stood positioned along its length, weapons lowered but ready, not aimed, not threatening, prepared. For what, I could not determine. The human did not acknowledge them. He passed through without hesitation, and they did not stop him, not one. The doors sealed behind him with a soft, final resonance. And then, silence. Not the silence of anticipation, not the silence of fear. Something heavier, something that settled into the structure of the chamber itself, into the minds of every being present. The absence of the human was more significant than his presence had been, because now there was nothing to react to, nothing to measure, nothing to predict, only the knowledge of what had occurred and what it meant. I withdrew slightly from the immediate scene, allowing the broader implications to surface fully. Across the galaxy, the shift continued. Alliances once formed on assumptions of strength were being reconsidered, policies rewritten, engagement strategies abandoned in favor of caution. Not because humanity had demanded it, but because they had demonstrated something far more persuasive than force: capability, and more importantly, control over that capability. This was the turning point, not marked by war, not defined by conquest, but by realization. The understanding that power is not determined by who can destroy the most, but by who chooses when destruction is necessary. Humans had shown both, and that duality made them something the galaxy had never encountered before. Not conquerors, not aggressors, but something far more complex, a variable that could not be removed, only respected. Back in the chamber, movement slowly resumed. Voices returned, though quieter. Commands were issued, though cautiously. The machinery of governance struggled to reassert itself over a reality that no longer fit its design. But it would never return to what it had been. That was impossible, because every being present carried the same understanding now. Humans are capable of unimaginable violence. We had seen it, measured it, failed to stop it, and yet they had chosen not to go further. That choice was the most dangerous element of all, because it meant that everything we had witnessed, every action, every restraint, every decision, had been intentional, and intention can change. I focused once more on the sealed doors through which the human had exited, on the space he had left behind, on the silence that still lingered, heavy and unbroken. And a final realization settled into place. This moment would be studied for generations, analyzed, debated, feared, but never undone. Because from this point forward, Every decision the galaxy made would have to account for them. Not as a minor species, not as a distant concern, but as a central force, a presence that did not need to expand to dominate, only to exist. And as that truth anchored itself into the foundation of our understanding, one question remained. If this is how humanity behaved when restrained, then what in all existence would force them not to be?
We tell the story differently now, not as it happened, but as it means, because meaning is what survives. The chamber where it occurred has since been preserved, not restored, not altered, but left exactly as it was in the aftermath of that moment. The polished floor still bears the microscopic fractures from the impact. The walls still carry the faint energy residue of weapons that were never fired. And at the center, a marker. Not grand, not ceremonial. A single, precise indentation where Commander Virek's head came to rest. We do not remove it. We do not repair it. Because that mark is no longer damage. It is a lesson. Across the galaxy, that lesson has been replicated, not physically, but symbolically, recorded in archives, taught in military academies, embedded into diplomatic protocols, not as a story of violence, but as a warning against misunderstanding. We had mocked them. That is the truth history does not soften. We had looked upon humanity, a species born of unstable gravity, violent climates, and relentless biological competition, and we had seen only limitation, fragility, insignificance. We had mistaken their lack of immediate aggression for weakness, their absence of domination for incapability. And so, when one of our own struck them, publicly, deliberately, we believed the outcome was already decided. We believed we were witnessing the reinforcement of hierarchy. Instead, we witnessed its collapse. I was there. I saw it unfold not as legend, not as exaggeration, but as reality stripped of expectation. I saw a being stand at the center of overwhelming force and redefine it. For cycles after the incident, analysis dominated every level of galactic thought. Simulations were run, variables adjusted, outcomes projected. All reached the same conclusion. If escalation had occurred, if even a fraction more pressure had been applied, the chamber would not have contained the result, nor the station, nor potentially the systems surrounding it. Not because humans seek destruction, but because when they are forced beyond a certain threshold, they do not stop. That is the part we failed to understand. Violence to most species is a state, a condition, something they enter and often cannot fully exit. For humans, it is a tool, one they wield with terrifying precision, one they put down just as deliberately. And that distinction is everything. The mark left by Virek's fall became more than a point of reference. It became a boundary, a line not drawn in theory, but in consequence. Cross this, and you will not control what follows. Entire civilizations have since adjusted their teachings. Young strategists are no longer instructed solely in the principles of dominance and expansion. They are taught restraint, not as weakness, but as necessity, because the presence of humanity has redefined the cost of miscalculation. I have reviewed countless accounts since that day, encounters between humans and other species, negotiations, conflicts avoided before they could begin. A pattern emerges. Humans do not initiate domination. They do not impose control without cause, but when confronted, when cornered, provoked, or dismissed, their response is not proportional. It is decisive, overwhelming, final. And that is why the galaxy now treats them not with fear alone, but with something far more complex: respect. Not the kind born from admiration, but the kind forged through understanding risk. Respect that acknowledges capability. Respect that recognizes boundaries. Respect that does not test those boundaries without absolute necessity. It is unprecedented. Never before has an entire galaxy shifted its perception of a species so completely, so rapidly, and so irreversibly. Not through conquest, not through expansion, but through a single moment of undeniable truth. I find myself returning to that moment often, not to the violence, but to what came after: the stillness, the control, the choice. Because that is where the real power revealed itself. Any being can destroy. Given sufficient force, sufficient desperation, sufficient time, destruction is always possible. But to stand at the edge of escalation, to hold that power in perfect balance, and to choose not to unleash it further, that requires something else entirely, something rarer, something far more dangerous: discipline. Humans possess it, not universally, not perfectly, but sufficiently, and that is enough. There are those who still fear them. There always will be. Fear is the natural response to uncertainty, to capability beyond comprehension. But fear alone is insufficient. It leads to reaction, to mistakes, to escalation. And escalation in the presence of humanity is a path that does not end well. So we have learned. We have adapted, as they do. We approach differently now. We speak with consideration. We act with awareness. Not because we are forced to, but because we understand the alternative. And in that understanding, something unexpected has emerged. Not alliance, not unity, but balance. A state in which power is acknowledged, not challenged blindly. Where strength exists alongside restraint. Where potential destruction serves not as a goal, but as a deterrent. Humans stand at the center of that balance, not above it, not outside it, but within it, anchoring it through their very nature. Strong enough to end conflicts, wise enough to avoid them. That is what we failed to see. That is what we now cannot ignore. The most dangerous beings in the galaxy are not those who seek war. They are predictable, manageable. Their intentions are clear. Their paths are visible. No, the true danger lies with those who are capable of war and choose peace. Because peace, when held by such hands, is not weakness. It is a decision, one that can be reversed, one that can be withdrawn, one that, if broken, reveals everything it was holding back. I am no longer uncertain. I am no longer confused. I have seen enough, analyzed enough, understood enough. The galaxy survived that moment not because we were stronger, or smarter, or more advanced. We survived because the human chose to let us. That is the truth that defines everything that followed. And it is the truth that will define everything yet to come. So we remember, we teach, we do not forget, because the lesson was written clearly, not in words, not in treaties, but in blood and in restraint. And as long as that lesson endures, there is hope. Because the same species capable of ending us is also the one choosing every moment not to, for now.